Hey there, it is Corinne and Sarah. This is Plus Politics Live. My name is Corinne Straight. I am here with Sarah Blessing. How you doing, Sarah?
Amazing, because I get to be with you.
I know, I'm so excited. I don't know if I will say this is a fun episode, but it is definitely an interesting episode. And we are going to be talking today about the county and the city of Elkhart, Indiana. So Elkhart is the city within Elkhart County. They have gotten a lot of attention over the last several years for some wrongful convictions that stemmed from police misconduct and some unethical behavior from the prosecutor's office. And not only do I live in this community and am aware of this issue that's been happening in Elkhart, I also worked for the city of Elkhart for a long time and handled 2 of the wrongful conviction settlements when they were announced. So so that's what we're going to get into today. And we want people in the comments to share your thoughts, talk with each other, discuss. I would encourage you right off the jump here. I'm going to encourage you to go check out 2 excellent pieces of reporting. ProPublica did a series in partnership with the South Bend Tribune began in 2018. They did a series on the Elkhart Police Department. And then more recently, there has been a series called Lawless running in the Indy Star. And it's by a reporter named Christine Phillips. She has written stories about Elkhart as these cases have been breaking. And she's done a really good job of coming up to Elkhart and spending time with some of the people in the community and getting their story and really understanding the reverberations of what happens when someone is wrongfully convicted. Because I always think about, not only is the wrong person in prison, the real perpetrator is still out there, and there is no justice. Justice is not served just when somebody is put behind bars. Justice is served when the right person is put behind bars.
Right.
And that's what we can get into a little bit. And I'll preface all of this by saying there are definitely some quote unquote bad apples in this story that we will talk about. None of them work for the Elkhart Police Department any longer. They've been gone for a number of years. One of them is no longer living. And the issues that came out of the department that these cases have brought to light have led to some systemic changes within the Elkhart Police Department. And although Elkhart is the focus here, what makes me really additionally feel defeated when I read these cases is to think of how many other examples there are, because we know that wrongful convictions happen a lot. What has happened in the city of Elkhart is very unique because they have garnered the attention of an incredible legal team who is working systematically just on cases out of Elkhart. And you can only imagine if that kind of legal team existed for other cities in the country, what would they uncover? So I don't necessarily think it's because Elkhart is quote unquote worse than other places. There are some unique elements to the city of Elkhart and to Elkhart County, the justice system in general. There are some unique elements, but these elements, especially when it comes to systemic racism, systemic bias, witness coercion, witness intimidation, these tactics happen and have happened in law enforcement across the country for a long time. And thankfully for the exonerated individuals in these cases, they got the attention of this extraordinary legal team and the exoneration clinic, which is run out of the University of Notre Dame Law School. So they're local people working on this, which I also think is fascinating. We call this area up here, if for those of you who aren't familiar, up in northern Indiana.
Region?
Well, the region, that's where I grew up. So the region,
okay.
Northwest Indiana, that is kind of Chicagoland. So if you think of the northwest corner of the state, where I am is the north central part of Indiana that butts right up to Michigan. And we call this area Michiana.
I've heard that before.
Yes.
Yeah. We're Kentuckiana.
You're Kentuckiana, exactly. So that's kind of because your media market is the same way. If you're turning on news in Corinne, it's about Louisville. And so when we are now in our corner of Southwest Michigan, that's in our media market, is really, there's lots of small towns. So there's not a dominant city, but it encompasses the whole thing. So you'll get Michigan news and Indiana news. Yeah. So let's dive into it, Sarah, if you're ready.
I just want to point out, so Corinne is an expert on this on these things that she's going to be talking about today. You actually did this for your job while it was
Yes.
happening. So I'm appreciative that we have an expert on the show who happens to be the host.
Yes.
Which I think we're very lucky for that. And also I just want to say I'm appreciative of all of police officers that put on that uniform and fight to protect us and risk their lives to protect us. I'm thankful for them. And we are not attacking police. We are just saying sometimes the system is broken and it allows for bad things to happen. And if we don't examine them, we can't fix them. And that's what we're talking about today. We can still fix this system and get it better. And also at the same time, be very thankful for people that are doing this job.
Yes, absolutely.
Since I've met cops and I'm friends with them, now I realize, since they've told me, they have a hiring problem. It is because of the damage that they've taken to them culturally. It's hard to hire good cops. So I'm just thankful for everybody that does this job. And now let's get into it. It's the system.
That's why we talk. I mean, if anybody has been listening to this show that Sarah and I have been doing now for a few months, we did an entire series in February on Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction, the ramifications of the Civil War, of Jim Crow laws, and the 13th Amendment. And I'll go back just a little bit to remind everyone, the 13th Amendment was the amendment that abolished slavery. And the way that it is written, it says, enslaving somebody, locking somebody up is now illegal, except for punishment of a crime. And what happened post-Civil War, and Frederick Douglass has a very famous quote where he says, once the war is over, Frederick Douglass said, okay, what form is slavery going to take now? Because he understood, like many people understood, slavery was the economy of the South. You had free labor. Your entire economy had been built for over 200 years at that point on the system of slavery. How do you replace that? You arrest people. You arrest them for literally walking down the street. You arrest them for looking at a woman. You arrest them for dropping a piece of trash, and you put them in jail and you force them to go work in the fields. And of course, that is Black men. That is predominantly Black men. And when we think that that was a system over 200 years ago, we are still seeing it when you look at the data that shows the rate of incarceration for Black men compared to white and other races. It's extraordinarily high. And so that's what we talk about when we talk about systemic racism. Even though this was 200 years ago, the inclination to believe the Black population is more inclined to criminal activity, is more likely to be violent. All of that is baked in. And so officer after officer after officer, generation after generation comes in, and they're taught by people above them. They're taught that, and then they teach that to people under them.
And sometimes they're taught it as they're little kids, just growing up in the world. They see it. They see the movies on TV that are portraying that. They're hearing other adults say things that, show fear for people that are Black. And it's really done damage.
It has.
And we're working on it. Things are getting better.
Yes.
But we still need to keep working on it.
Yes. And it shows how much time it takes to eradicate that kind of bias.
It really wasn't that long ago that
no.
We've had, we talked about it all in your Plots and Politics shows, and I learned so much from you, but it's just not that long ago. We still have it, and pretending like we don't, I think, does not help.
And there are major, I would love to dive into this on another episode. There are major, very profitable corporations in the United States who still rely upon prison labor. And when you look at inmates who are making 17 cents an hour to manufacture a product that's going to be sold for hundreds of dollars, I mean, it's the system.
Some of them are out there literally picking cotton. Some of them are picking cotton.
Yes. Yep. They're farm workers.
There's for-profit prisons profiting off of prison labor. So that's what Frederick Douglass was talking about.
What's the new form of slavery? It's prisoners. And so fast forward to the late 1990s in Elkhart, Indiana. Elkhart, Indiana, for those of you who are not familiar, is in Elkhart County. It's in north central Indiana. It's a city of about 50,000 people, a county of around 200,000 people. RV manufacturing is the predominant industry up here. And so our population, one of the fun facts that I learned, the population of our county swells by over 50,000 every day because of that many people come into Elkhart to work and then they go back and live in another county. So it's a lot. There are a lot of people working in the manufacturing industry here who move around. We have a lot of migrant labor, farm labor for all of the agriculture industry up here. So that's the city of Elkhart. And throughout the US since 1989, there have been 2,700 people exonerated and freed from prison after they were found to be wrongfully convicted. And the vast majority of those have been as a result of advancements in technology. DNA samples were taken, they were taken and could not be processed, or they were processed at a very primitive level that then we could test them later on. And that has led to lots of people being exonerated. So we're kind of in a golden age as far as technology goes, where some people are able to be let out of prison.
It's such a horrible thing to imagine people locked in prison that didn't do the crime. And, it's a joke that everybody says they didn't do it, but there are people in prison that did not do the crime. And it's sad to know that, but it's important, because if we don't realize that, then we can't go back and uncover the truth and use today's technology to free these people. So I am happy to hear that some people are getting free. We need to keep working on this.
Yes, there's a lot of work to do. And not all wrongful convictions are the result of misconduct or deliberate misconduct on the part of investigators, or law enforcement, or the prosecutor's office. There is definitely incompetence because there's human error. There are witnesses who give false testimony that can skew the investigation in a completely different direction. And so there are kind of two things happening when it comes to wrongful convictions: willful misconduct, falsifying evidence, coercing confessions. And then there is kind of mistakes that are made in investigations, tainting of evidence, losing of evidence, things like that. And the convictions, the two of the wrongful convictions that we're going to talk about today, are the result of blatant misconduct by police officers and by the prosecutor's office. So, over the past 15 years, just in the city of Elkhart, there have been 6 people who have been exonerated after being found to be wrongfully convicted. And when you compare that to other cities around the country, Elkhart is definitely punching above its weight when it comes to wrongful convictions and exonerated individuals. It's only a city of 50,000 people. It's not that big. And what we have here happening in Elkhart is a lawyer named Elliot Slosser and the exoneration clinic at the University of Notre Dame Law School. Their concentration on Elkhart is really what is bringing all of these cases to light. So you can only imagine, like I said before, if this was in place in other places in the country, what else would we find? So this number of wrongful convictions and exonerations, you will find in much larger cities that have way more resources. So it's very unique that Elkhart has this many folks that have been let out of prison. So let's talk about 2 of them.
All right.
Yeah. And so 6 people have been let out over the last 15 years. I forgot to mention this.
In Elkhart?
Just in Elkhart. And over $26 million has been paid out in insurance settlements to those 6 who were wrongfully convicted. And those insurance settlements are paid by the cities or the entities, whether it's the city, the sheriff's department, the prosecutor's office, by that entity's liability insurance company. So it's not directly coming out of the pocket of taxpayers as you think in the form of tax dollars, but it does lead to insurance premiums going up over time because your city becomes identified as a high-risk place to insure. Just like any bad driver, your insurance premiums are going to go up.
And it stinks because it doesn't matter how great they are doing now.
Yes.
It's that in the past, they made some mistakes, and so it's raising their premiums, but it's not the exact these high $1 million settlements, it's not that much.
No, not
Right.
usually not. No. And the two that we're going to talk about today are actually the highest amount of wrongful conviction settlements in Indiana history. So let's start with Keith Cooper. Keith Cooper is a Black man, and I think that is very relevant to this story and very important to mention up top. He had recently moved his family to Elkhart from Chicago. He was married at the time. He was young. He was in his late 20s, a father of 3. And he came to Elkhart for a job in the RV manufacturing industry because that's what he had heard. I'm going to give my family a better life in Elkhart. And he was working on doing just that. All of a sudden, in January of 1997, he is arrested by police in the city of Elkhart. He is accused and eventually charged with armed robbery and attempted murder. There was no evidence to show that he had actually done this. He was accused of committing this crime with another man named Christopher Parrish. Chris and Keith did not know each other. They never met each other. They were both Black men. Keith Cooper had not, there are families in Elkhart who have been here for ever and ever and ever, and you kind of just know everybody. Keith Cooper wasn't one of those people. He was fairly new to the area. He did not know Chris Parrish, but apparently, according to the Elkhart police, they committed this crime together. There was DNA that was left at the scene of the crime because a hat was left there. DNA evidence that was tested at the time in the late 90s cleared Keith Cooper as a suspect. So it wasn't as exact as what we have now, where it can literally point to somebody. It was able to be used as a technique to rule people out. So we know this DNA, it's not Keith Cooper. We
didn't know who it was, but we knew it wasn't him.
We knew it's not him.
Charged. Okay.
Yes. That evidence was never presented at trial, and it was never turned over to the defense.
So the defense didn't even know it was available
to
say somebody wore this hat. It wasn't the person you're charging with.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
And so from an investigative standpoint, the moment that DNA comes back and it says it's not Keith Cooper, as an investigator with integrity, you say, oh, well, crap, we got the wrong guy. Let him out. Let's go back to the drawing table and figure out who to get.
Right.
That is not what happened here, unfortunately. And there was false testimony that was given by several witnesses, including a witness who was a victim of the armed robbery. Her name is Nona Cannell. She went on record with the Elkhart Police Department identifying Keith Cooper. And it was very confusing at the time because her identification of him was a little fishy. There were other members in the Elkhart Police Department who said, this doesn't seem right. And when they learned of the detective who had actually given her the lineup, it made sense to them how she identified Keith Cooper, because the detective on this case was Steve Rizutko, and he was known, he kind of had a reputation for putting together very leading lineups. When you put together a photo lineup or even an in-person lineup, there's a way to do it, an ethical way to do it where the person is not biased. Right. You can absolutely present it in a way to get them to pick the person you want them to pick. And that's what happened with this woman, with Nona Cannell. Years later, in front of the parole board that was actually hearing Keith Cooper's pardon petition, because we will get there, the man eventually does get pardoned. But in front of the parole board, she said, if you want to make me happy today, clear Keith Cooper and give him back his name, because I was wrong. I was wrong. I was coerced. I was wrong.
And way to go for her for admitting that. That takes a brave person.
The other victim in this crime, his name is Michael Kirshner. He was the man who was actually shot. He was shot in the commission of this robbery. He also supported Keith Cooper's pardoning and said this man did not do it.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So Steve Rizutko was a detective with the Elkhart Police Department at a time. He had a very long pattern. He had actually been demoted before. He would pressure witnesses. He would coerce testimony. He would put together suggestive lineups of people. And he made a decision, in that moment to ignore the evidence, the physical evidence that actually ruled Keith Cooper out as a suspect. In 2002, more sophisticated DNA testing was done. And not only did it rule Cooper out as the perpetrator, which it had before, it directly pointed to somebody else now. And it pointed to a man named Jolannes Cortez Irvin. He was actually serving time in Michigan for murder.
Oh, wow.
And when you think of wrongful convictions as being the pebble that's like thrown in the water and the ripples just go endlessly, the victims of this man, Irvin, the actual perpetrator of this armed robbery and attempted murder in 1996, it was the end of 1996 when he did it, 6 years would go by and he had the opportunity to kill someone else because Detective Steve Rzutko decided to ignore that DNA evidence and continue to pursue Keith Cooper.
Yeah.
So the victims here are not only the wrongfully convicted, not only the actual victims of the crime who never get justice, but additionally the future victims of a violent predator. So obviously this man was robbing people at gunpoint and had no problem shooting them in the commission of a robbery. He went on to actually murder someone.
Wow.
And so to think of the reverberations here and the downline consequences, it really can make your head spin. Cooper worked to pursue justice with the help at that time of an attorney out of Chicago named Elliot Slosser. I named him at the beginning here. He was kind of just dipping his toes in to this case at the beginning. And when he started to go through Keith Cooper's case, he just got a thread and he started pulling. And what he found was a pretty systemic pattern of injustice and racial bias within the Elkhart Police Department that led to future investigations for wrongful convictions. Steve Rzutko was also found, and this is kind of yucky, but he was also found to have paid informants for information.
Wow.
And exchanging sexual favors of some kind for additional information, for witness information. And the Elkhart Police Department did not fire him, did not attempt to fire him. And the Elkhart County Prosecutor's Office continued to use him as a witness on the stand in future trials.
So there's the system not working.
Yes, there's
so
the
we've
system
gotten
not
evidence
working.
that this person is using his position of power to harm others. They see the evidence and they choose to let this person continue. There's the problem.
Yes. And so when you think of in the legal world, there is, the fruit of the poison tree, which if you go into someone's home to collect evidence and you do so without a search warrant, anything you collect is the fruit from that poisoned tree. It cannot be used. You've made it void, right? And so you've kind of tainted everything around you. So it's the same thing with allowing Rzutko to continue to testify when you already know he's not credible. You already know he's pretty dangerous when it comes to pursuing people who did not commit the crime. And you keep putting him on the stand. In future cases, you keep tainting and poisoning future cases. It's really incredible to think of those ripples, being cast out in that lake. After that DNA evidence came to light, so that was 2002. It was still 4 more years before Keith Cooper was let out of prison. He was let out of prison eventually in 2006, which was like 8.5 years after he was put in there. However, his felony conviction remained intact. So after spending 8.5 years in prison, had a job, had a family, had a home, when he went into prison, all of that was gone when he got out and he couldn't get work. This DNA evidence that literally pointed to a murderer in Michigan who obviously had a pattern of violent behavior. It was very obvious that this was the man who committed that crime. Elkhart County prosecutor at the time, and this name will sound familiar to you, Sarah Curtis Hill, who went on to become Indiana's attorney general and also has a very shady history of sexual assault allegations and other misconduct. He doubled down on Keith Cooper being guilty. And he said, Cooper, this was in 2016. So this is years later. Curtis Hill says, Cooper can proclaim his innocence all he wants. However, there is nothing showing that he is innocent. He has not been exonerated. And this 1997 conviction stands. I think when people talk about wrongful convictions, this is probably the part that really gets people the most, of just the absolute lack of humility. Like, how can you, as an attorney, as a trained legal expert with many years of experience, Curtis Hill had many years of experience at this point when he made that statement. How can you look at DNA evidence that literally points to a convicted murderer committing this crime and still say, well, he can say he's innocent all he wants? I mean, that's the part that really gets to people. And when you look at somebody like Curtis Hill, he is someone who ran for attorney general on this platform of being tough on crime at all costs. So he made a political calculation. And this is also the issue when you talk about judges being elected and prosecutors being elected, attorney generals being elected. The professional ethical standards by which they are to abide kind of get a little fuzzy when they are trying to win a campaign, when they are trying to get elected. And that's really what we see with Curtis Hill. There are several more examples of him being pretty irrationally aggressive when it comes to crime. And that was really just to set himself up for a political future. Working on the pardon conviction. So Cooper now is out of prison. Not only is he out of prison, he wants his felony conviction expunged because obviously the DNA shows another person did
and it's
it.
hurting his life having that on his record. He can't get a job. He can't support his family. Yeah.
And Elliot Slosser and the legal team were pulling at that thread, starting to kind of unravel this entire thing. And that is when they discovered that this DNA evidence that ruled Cooper out, even though it didn't point to Cortez Irvin at the time, it didn't point directly to the actual assailant, it did rule out Cooper. They found out that Steve Rzutko and the Elkhart prosecutor's office knew that before trial and did not disclose it. So that was really kind of where they were able to sink their teeth into, because now they had proof that violations were committed by the detectives and the prosecutor's office. They filed motions. They were working to gain discovery in this case. They wanted to find out what else Rzutko knew and when he knew it, and kind of start building a case from there to eventually exonerate Keith Cooper. On the night before those deadlines for discovery and Rzutko's statements were due to the court, Rzutko died by suicide. He took his own life. And of course, he was never convicted of anything. He was never even brought up on charges of anything. But when you look at not only this case and several other cases he was involved in, it's pretty clear that this was kind of a career-long pattern for him.
This is all sad. It's
very sad.
It's all sad.
It's very sad.
It's such a cultural problem that we all face, where people do not want to admit when they make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And there comes a time in your life, because I've done this, I've lied before to get myself out of trouble. I try not to do it now, but I did it when I was younger, where you realize you messed up and somebody's found out about it. And you can either say, I messed up, I'm sorry, I'm going to do better next time, or you can lie again. Mm-hmm. And we need people in positions of power that are humble enough and willing to grow to say, I messed up. This is messy. This is not black and white issue. This is gray areas when you're charging someone with a crime and putting them in a jail cell. Mm-hmm. We need people that are doing that to be able to say, oh, here's new evidence I didn't see. Here's this. I need to say we made a mistake. But I know they're afraid of the culture attacking, the press, everybody attacking them. And if we just made it collectively better as a society to accept people's mistakes, less people would suffer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And made it, if it was a mistake, if it was a moment of bad judgment, to give people the grace and the ability to say, I screwed up. Let's try to fix this going forward. Because at the end of the day, in all of these cases, there are victims denied justice. The perpetrators were eventually the perpetrator of Keith Cooper, what Keith Cooper was convicted of. They were caught, but the next case we're going to talk about, they were never caught. We don't know who did it. And so the amount of resources that are put towards pursuing somebody who you knew at the beginning was ruled out as a suspect. You're going to put all of this money and all of this time in a criminal trial, which is unbelievably expensive and time consuming and resource intensive from a taxpayer perspective. The unethical layers to this are just so frustrating. And in the investigation with Keith Cooper's legal team, as they started unraveling and uncovering what Detective Steve Rzutko was doing, even after Rzutko passed away, died by suicide, they started finding this kind of rumor of this term called the Wolverines. And at first it kind of sounded unbelievable. It turned out to very much be true. And the group of Wolverines within the Elkhart Police Department, it was a pretty small group of officers who called themselves the Wolverines. It was kind of their own stupid club name. It sounds so juvenile, but they had a pattern of specifically targeting Black men in the city for crimes, scapegoating Black men. They were clearly racially biased. They also had a pattern of covering for one another. So they would help falsify police reports, etc. And through all of these stories, there have been, because for a long time, even people within the department, people who retired, denied that this was real. They would say, oh, that's just a rumor. That's not true. In the subsequent years, over 12 officers, including a former police chiefs and a former mayor of the city, have confirmed that the Wolverines did in fact exist.
Wow.
Even the former chief was a member of that team and worked to perpetuate this systemic racial bias within the city of Elkhart. And the city's first Black police chief, his name is J.J. Ivory, he said that in sworn testimony, when he was being deposed, he said these officers would absolutely lie and defraud in order to protect one another as they pursued the wrong suspects. So this is at this point now is very well documented. And so that, the team keeps pulling the thread. What else are they going to find? What else are they going to find? As they work on this, they eventually get the pardon petition to be approved and presented to the governor of Indiana. Because the governor has the option in state trials and state criminal trials, has the option to pardon someone to expunge their record. So that way the felony would be off of Keith Cooper's record. And so pardons are done for a variety of reasons. This pardon petition was first presented to Governor Mike Pence in 2016, who went on to become the vice president because he was picked as now President Trump's running mate. And Governor Eric Holcomb took Mike Pence's place in the next election, was reelected. And one of the first actions that Governor Holcomb took in 2017 was granting Keith Cooper's pardon petition. And in an Indiana first, the governor of Indiana said, I am pardoning Keith Cooper because he is innocent.
Wow.
And that usually doesn't happen. Most of the time, someone is pardoned for different reasons. To come out and say this man is innocent had never happened before. That was a huge, huge victory for Keith Cooper and his family, of course, and the legal team. Following that pardon, Keith Cooper sued all of the parties involved for a wrongful conviction settlement. The man who was convicted with him, Christopher Parrish, the dude that they had never met each other before police said, hey, you committed this crime together. And they're like, no, we don't know each other.
We don't know each other.
Christopher Parrish, he was let out of prison earlier. He received a $5 million settlement for his wrongful conviction. Keith Cooper received a settlement in 2022 for $7.5 million. And at that point in 2022, it was the largest settlement amount in Indiana history ever had been given to Keith Cooper. And that was during my time at the city. And
wow,
I was the person who went and I held a press conference that day, and I went and stood in front of the cameras and I read a statement. And it was, I really pushed, and several others on my team really pushed to be more conciliatory as a city, because so many of these statements that you read people don't want to admit wrongdoing. They don't want to open themselves up for legal consequences, when all of us know the right thing to do is to say, the city messed up big time and we're really sorry.
Yeah.
We couldn't exactly say sorry, but I was able to craft a statement that did express regret, and we used the word regret.
Can you find this video? Can we post it to Project Next
I
Step?
can try to post it. I'm sure, I know it's out there somewhere. I have a screenshot of it. Because it is a really weird place to be in, to have to kind of be the face of the person who stands out there.
Yeah.
But I'm a nobody, which is important. I'm not an elected official. I'm not somebody who could face really political repercussions for standing out in front of the cameras. It was just a communications strategy, and it was really sad. It was really sad. And so I did find my statement here. Hold on.
You're pretty fast. Yeah, because it makes sense they asked you because you weren't going to get in trouble for saying it. They didn't want somebody that could be blamed. It is just such a sad thing, but it's so amazing that you did that. Again, if people would just admit wrong and fix their mistake. Like, as soon as you see the mistake, fix it. If we just did that in the world, if people in positions of power saw a mistake and tried to fix it instead of cover it up, think how much better we would be in life today.
Yeah. And I found my quote in here. It's talking about regret and empathy. I'm not even going to read it because I love Keith Cooper's quote so much better.
Okay.
In Keith Cooper's statement, which he has done a really good job since his release of being out in the public and speaking. He'll speak to law students. He'll talk about his process.
That's amazing.
And what he said is, for all the other Keith Coopers out there, keep your hope and stay the faith, because we had it happen. And so that has been his message to all of the other people who are wrongfully convicted: stay hopeful and keep fighting. And that's what he has done for years since he has been out of prison.
I wonder how many people are working. There are lawyers out there that they decide to take these types of cases, and I'm so thankful for them. So I'm glad that he's an advocate for that. It's such a sad story, but it's beautiful in the way that it's being handled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he has handled it with grace and continues to be someone who's a resource for especially these law students at the University of Notre Dame. And so I mentioned that Keith Cooper's settlement, the $7.5 million, set the record for the highest wrongful conviction settlement in the state of Indiana until the next settlement came out. We actually broke our own record, as Elkhart did, within a year and a half. It was absolutely depressing when the settlement came in. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? We just broke our record again. Not good press for the city of Elkhart. Definitely not to be the communications director at a time like that.
And again, it's not the people in power when you were there. No, it was earlier.
Over 20 years ago.
It's like being blamed for things you did not do.
Yep. But it is hard because even though the conviction was 20 years ago, you then hear somebody like Curtis Hill say, well, we stand by it. We said, even though the DNA literally points to another person who was in prison for murder, you have people like Curtis Hill 20 years after the fact playing the political game to save his own behind.
I hate him. I hate political sliminess. Yep. I hate political sliminess. And that's what that,
Yep.
Yeah.
So about a year and a half later, after Keith Cooper's settlement was announced, the settlement record was broken when this man's settlement amount was announced. His name is Andrew Royer, and he actually served 16 years in prison. Keith Cooper served 8.5. Andrew Royer served 16 years in prison for a crime he absolutely did not commit. And Elliot Slosser, working on the Keith Cooper case, prompted students at the University of Notre Dame to kind of reinvigorate their exoneration club, because it had been just a club before where they would learn about wrongful convictions as law students. But it wasn't really anything that was productive until after the Keith Cooper case. And then all of these law students got together with Elliot Slosser and other law professors, and they actually started doing a clinic and working on these cases. And the first case they took on was the case of Andrew Royer. In 2002, a 94-year-old woman named Helen Saylor was found strangled to death in her apartment. She had spent the day with family before. It was around Thanksgiving, and she had spent time with her family on the day before. She was supposed to come downstairs and be picked up the next day to go out for another outing. She did not come downstairs, and then unfortunately her body was found. Andrew Royer and his co-defendant, Lana Cannon, also resided in the building, and a series of very bizarre events would lead to Lana Cannon and Andrew Royer actually being charged with this crime and even being considered suspects. And what happens in this case is a story that is pretty familiar to anyone who has followed exonerations in any capacity. You kind of know what police are going to do here. Following the murder, Nina Porter was traveling in a car with Lana Cannon, and they were pulled over by police. At the time, Nina Porter found herself in some legal trouble, and she was told by detectives, and I've listened to her interview several times. You can find it online. She was told by detectives, "Help us, or we're going to take your kids away." And so she did. She told them what they wanted to hear. And she ended up implicating the woman that was in the car with her, Lana Cannon, and Andrew Royer, which is very bizarre. So Andrew Royer also lived in the building. He was in his, he was in his 20s at the time, but he was someone of very diminished intellectual capacity. His mother would say, at most, he has the intellect of a 12-year-old. And he was brought in and interrogated for over 2 days by detectives. The vast majority of that interrogation was not recorded in any capacity.
Wow.
And at the end of that interrogation, he confesses. I'm putting quotes around confesses. He confesses to the crime. And very similar to, if anybody out there has watched Making a Murderer, if you've ever watched that on Netflix, there's a very similar situation with a young man named Brendan Dassey, who is interrogated and eventually, quote unquote, confesses. And after Brendan's confession, he's just like, "Okay, can my mom come pick me up now, or my dad come pick me up?"
It's so sad.
Because he has no understanding that I just confessed to murder. Andrew Royer did the same thing. So he was interrogated for over 2 days. His quote unquote confession took over 18 minutes. And in that 18 minutes, he is starting and stopping. He is being corrected by detectives. They are saying, "Don't you mean, I thought you meant, I thought you said." So they are leading him, because he has the mind of a kid, they are leading him down the path to confess to something he ultimately didn't do. When he gets to the end of that 18-minute confession, he also says, "Okay, can I go home now?"
Oh, this is so sad. Yeah,
So
you're right.
sad.
I have heard of this, and I do not watch these things. I've just heard of them.
Yeah.
This is familiar. This has happened before, this type of technique. Yeah, this is sad.
Yes. And something very similar to the Keith Cooper case actually happened here as well. Lana Cannon, who would be convicted alongside Royer as the co-defendant who committed this murder, there was one fingerprint found at the scene that a member of the Elkhart County Sheriff's Department actually said matched Lana Cannon. It did not match her. It actually ruled her out. And so there's just, again, it's lies on top of lies on top of lies.
You're right.
When the credibility of this fingerprint examiner and when it was proven that this was not Lana's fingerprint, she was released from prison in 2012. And she had a lot of guilt because she said, "I know I didn't do it. I know Andy didn't do it, and I'm out and he's not." It was a very difficult time for her. When Elliot Slosser and the legal team at Notre Dame started interviewing people, they started with Nina Porter, with that original witness who said, "This is who did it." And
And that's the woman who said they told her she was gonna lose her
she was
kids
going to lose her
if they didn't
kids.
say it.
Yep.
Okay.
And to hear her tell that story, she literally says, no, they told me point blank, you're going to lose your kids. 25 years later, for her to tell this 20 years later, for her to tell this story is just heartbreaking. And to think of how many other Nina Porters are out there, how many other people have been threatened to do what law enforcement wants them to do. It's really frustrating. At the time, after Andrew Royer's confession was given, the investigator on his case was a man named Carlton Conway, Detective Carlton Conway. There were many others inside the Elkhart Police Department who had a lot of questions about this. They really didn't believe that Andrew Royer did this. And a former officer, she said, Andrew Royer's interrogation was one of the worst things I have ever seen in my 34 years with the Elkhart Police Department. So it was not blanketly endorsed by everyone. It was endorsed by a few people, by a handful of people. It was endorsed. And it is important to point out that Andrew Royer is a white man. He's not black. The other exonerees out of Elkhart are black, but Andrew Royer was targeted because of his diminished capacity, because he was intellectually younger and he could be manipulated. And so that's what, it's the sex worker they find on the street saying, help us out or we're going to charge you. It's marginalized people. Sometimes that's based on race. Sometimes that's based on other factors. Andrew Royer started fighting his case with the Notre Dame exoneration team and eventually was released in 2020. He served 16 years in prison. And the way that they got to that release was actually really interesting. They were able to get a special judge appointed in another county. Kosciuszko County is actually a county southeast of us here in Elkhart. They went in front of a Kosciuszko County because, side note here, the original judge in Elkhart County who presided over Andrew Royer's trial and him being found guilty had presided over other trials where other people had been found to give false confessions and had been coerced to confess. And this judge, time and time again, would uphold the conviction. So when this judge in Elkhart County was faced with, hey, Conway and the investigative team knew that Andrew Royer had an intellectual disability, and they did not take any precautions to take care of him and to get him a legal advocate when he was being interrogated, the judge said, well, too bad. He confessed anyway. So Royer's team was able to get a special judge appointed in another county, which is sometimes what it takes. You have to go to another county. You can't keep, it's like you're banging your head against a wall over and over again. In Elkhart County, you're getting the same result because you're seeing the same judge. They were able, which is actually rare, they were able to get this special judge appointed in Kosciuszko County. And this judge found that Royer's confession was unreliable and involuntary, and the investigators had withheld exculpatory evidence, just like they did in Keith Cooper's case. So they withheld the fact that that print did not match. Conway is the detective in this case. And because after Andrew Royer's conviction was overturned, of course, the state of Indiana appealed it. And the appeals ruling from this court is a scathing report. It is 50 pages long. I have read it so many times. It goes through pieces of dialogue from trial where Conway is lying on the stand. He would make claims that Andrew Royer actually told him pieces of the crime scene that only the perpetrator could have known. They would go back to the pieces of the interrogation that were actually recorded, because very little of it was recorded. They'd go back and listen to those recordings and hear that Conway is the one feeding him that information before Royer says it back to him. So it was very clear, and this judge and the appeals court upholds that it's very clear that Royer was manipulated and Conway knew what he was doing. So the appeals court upheld the overturning of Royer's conviction and said, no, his overturning stands. He is not guilty of murder. And then in 2021, after that happened, the Elkhart County prosecutor decided to not retry Andrew Royer because they could have gone to trial once again to try to get him. They decided not to. And that is when the Elkhart Police Department started to work to get Conway fired, because there are a lot of protections in place for police officers. They are members of unions. You cannot just fire them blatantly. You have to kind of go through a process. And I want to read this quote here by a man I very much respect. I got to work with him for years. He's the former police chief in Elkhart, for the city of Elkhart. His name is Chris Seymour. He was working to get Conway fired at the time. And in his letter requesting Conway's termination, he said, Conway's conduct, your conduct, amounts to an assault upon the institution of justice, which you swore to uphold, and constitutes a violation of your oath of office. No measure of discipline for your conduct can restore your credibility within the criminal justice system. And that was such a powerful statement coming from the current police chief. And Chris Seymour is someone who spent over 25 years in the police department, had worked in homicide, had worked his way up to be in administration and a police chief. So he was there during this time. And he was someone who had kind of heard the rumors about the Wolverines, and he was never really convinced that it was really happening until all of this evidence started coming out. Conway eventually resigned. He wasn't terminated. He resigned, which is usually what they do if they believe their termination
eventually going to get fired
is eventually coming. But it's important to note that people like this, when they do resign, they don't lose their pension. They don't lose their benefits. So, Conway will be getting his pension, his health insurance, everything for the rest of his life, which
it seems like he should have been on trial. Like, why didn't he commit crimes?
Yeah. Yep. But who's going to bring charges against him? It would have to be the Elkhart County prosecutor to charge him. And if they charged him, they would have to admit their role in this as well. Okay. Because currently Elkhart County prosecutor Vicki Becker, she worked for Curtis Hill as a deputy during all those years. She worked on many of these cases. She is now the elected prosecutor in Elkhart County, and she participated in the interrogation of Andrew Royer. So she was very aware of what was happening.
So people just covering up their mistakes.
Yes.
So they're letting more things happen.
Yes.
Yeah. We have the Jamie Knowles scandal down here, Corinne, and I'm hoping one day we can get Sean Bossack on. He's what do you call it? An individual reporter. He
independent
investigative reporter. That's the main person that tracked this case. And Jamie Knowles is the sheriff of Clark County and Republican chair of District 9 in Indiana. And he's now in jail. And
as he should be.
The amount of people that weren't able to come out and say what he was doing because Jamie Knoll would go after them, and the amount of people that knew about it and let it continue because they knew they would get in trouble there's just so many, and it's really hard to uncover and to fix it now. We're in the process of cleaning up Jamie Knoll's mess, and it's still going on. So it's such a complicated problem, and if we just fixed the system so that there were more checks and balances, more accountability, we could fix this, you all. We could fix this. It's not like we're just hopeless and we're just going to let this stuff keep continuing. We can change some things so that if a cop coerces someone into saying they committed a crime they didn't, they get charged with the crime. I just think that should happen.
Yep. And because police officers and investigators in general in law enforcement, they have a lot of leeway in the investigative process. I mean, they are able to lie during an interrogation. They are able to say, your friend told us you did it. We found your shoes there. You left them there. And so when you start to unravel false confessions and understanding false confessions and what leads to it, it's true psychological manipulation. And there is to an extent, psychological manipulation that is not only allowed within police investigations, but is encouraged, because that is how you do get confessions. It just becomes very difficult to parse out which confessions are reliable and which are not, especially when you are going after someone who is under duress of any kind, if it's a stressful situation, if they are of diminished capacity, if they are tired because you've been talking to them for 12 hours. All of these tactics to wear somebody down and get them to say what you want them to say are used in legitimate confessions and false confessions alike. So it's very difficult to understand where the line is. And because somebody like Conway, Rzutko, et cetera, they certainly were not the only investigators involved in these, but themselves and others, the tactics they use were also tactics used by other officers to elicit legitimate confessions. So it's really, really hard to understand the difference. And Andrew Royer eventually went on to win the next record-breaking settlement against the city, which was over $11.7 million. And that broke Keith Cooper's record. Andrew Royer seems to be doing pretty well now. He lives with his mother and his stepmom. Keith Cooper also seems to be doing really well. He is remarried. He loves to spend a lot of time with his little dog and his new wife and her grandchildren. So there's a lot of healing that still needs to happen. One of the biggest pieces of contention here is that because of the manipulation that happened in the Helen Saylor murder, no one else has ever been arrested. No one else has ever been charged in her murder. And so we are 23 years away now after her murder. And we know how hard it gets to prove cases like this the more that time goes on. And had detectives done their job in the beginning, had they not manipulated Nina to give this kind of confession, maybe we would have had the correct person locked up. Because if someone, think of the kind of monster who breaks into or forces their way into a 94-year-old woman's apartment and strangles her. That is not someone who should be on the street.
All the resources were spent on convincing people to convict someone who clearly was innocent instead of spending that time finding the person who did it. And time is important, right? When it happened, that's going to be your best chance to track down the evidence. So
time is sad,
but I'm just thankful to everybody that helped clear up these wrongful convictions. So thanks. If you do that for your job for any place else in the world, thank you. And I know a lot of people are counting on you and hoping that you'll help them, so yeah, thanks, Corinne. This was fascinating.
This was it's most of this is fresh in my head. It feels like it was kind of just yesterday. There are so many different stories coming out of Elkhart that I do think the reporters who have done the work on this have been doing a really good job of getting those stories out and telling the stories of the collateral damage of the people that have been harmed by this. And the other, especially Black men who were around Keith Cooper's age, the Christopher Parrish who got picked up with him, the kind of fear that exists within the Black community is very similar to what we are seeing now amongst the immigrant community. When you can't trust law enforcement, when you don't feel like you can pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm in trouble, I need help, to call the police, which is probably second nature to a white person, we wouldn't think twice. It probably doesn't cross our mind that if we need help and call 911, we're going to get help. When an immigrant, when a man, especially a man of color, thinks about picking up that phone, they have to think, okay, are they going to treat me like a suspect? Or are they going to treat me like a victim? And those stories are still very palpable. I mean, most of these men who were living in Elkhart at that time, they're in their 50s now. This is not ancient history. No. This is very much a raw wound.
And my tip for anybody that fears local police, since I met Jason Kerberg, he told me what to do. He said, go up and talk to police, not in a scary situation. That's not when you see them out in their uniform and they're not busy, maybe they're on their lunch break or whatever, go up, introduce yourself, thank them for their service, for protecting them. And then if you have a question or concern, ask them.
Yes.
If your child is scared of police because of the media and everything, and you're with your child and you're at a place and you see a police officer, go up to them, introduce them, yourselves to them and talk to them so that the fear ends, so that if there ever is a time they need to call 911, they aren't scared. They've made a connection to the local police in their community. I try to talk to every police officer that I see when they're not busy.
Yeah.
And it has made me feel a lot better about my area in Southern Indiana. So I do recommend that to everybody. They're not your enemy. The majority of them are trying to protect you.
And there are so many of, the folks that are working within the Elkhart Police Department that I was proud to consider my colleagues for many years when I was there. I would trust them with my life. I would trust them to take care of my family. The former police chief, Chris Seymour, that I mentioned, is someone from whom I learned a lot. I learned a lot from him about law enforcement, about the processes. And that was really helpful for me. And I want to throw in one more thing here, because since my children were young, when I started teaching them kind of the ways of the world, I instilled in them at a very young age, you never talk to police. If they come to talk to you, you ask for your mother or you ask for an attorney. Because so many of these wrongful convictions are traced back to someone sitting in an interrogation room without legal representation. And people have been conditioned to believe that if they ask for an attorney, it makes them look guilty.
Yeah.
You got to let that go.
That's a good tip.
It doesn't matter if you are pulled over and you are asked to get out of your car. You do not say a word. You do not say a word. You ask for an attorney. If a police officer, because all of our schools have police officers in them now, so that should be a good thing. But I told my kids, if that cop comes down to the room and says, hey, I want to talk to you, you say, yeah, when my mom is here.
That's a good tip.
And you literally say not another word.
She is a lawyer and she runs for State House in Indiana. Her TikTok and Instagram, she gives tips. And yesterday's tip was that.
Yes.
She said that exact same thing. So she's a lawyer and she explains it in simple terms. So Victoria Martz, if you want to find her on social media.
She's one of my favorite follows.
Yeah, I want to have her on the show and talk about like the main things she knows that could help regular people that aren't lawyers. So that is a good tip. And it doesn't mean you need to be rude to the officer. Just say, oh, I'm just doing what my mom told me. My mom said that I shouldn't talk unless she comes. So please have that, and just smile and be nice,
Yeah. And when you're an adult, you say, because the other part that's kind of on your side now is any interaction with law enforcement is recorded on their body cam. So when you are very polite and you just say, I know my constitutional right, and I am entitled to an attorney, and I would love to speak with you.
Miranda rights, right?
My attorney is not even Miranda. Miranda is usually
that's if you're being arrested.
That's if you're being arrested, you're Mirandized. But if they say, I just want to talk to you, Sarah, we're just going to chat. This is not a big deal. We're just going to talk. You're like, okay, I would love to talk with you once my attorney is here. That's as simple as you can handle it, because it doesn't mean that it's going to prevent all wrongdoing, but because so many people have been conditioned to say, well, you asked for a lawyer, that must make you guilty. That is one of my least favorite, misconceptions and kind of
it's on it's on the news, that's on movies and TV shows,
and reporters, some people of the media that are sensationalizing some of these stories, they play into it too. Isn't it suspicious that they hired a defense attorney? I'm like,
you're trying to protect yourself from a wrongful conviction, and you're allowed to do that.
You're allowed to do that. So
thanks, Corinne. This has been amazing. Next week, I think we might be talking totally different topic. Body issues.
Let's do it.
I'm going to be I get to do a fashion show with Harrison County Arts. It's mind-blowing that I get to do this. It'll be my second time.
It'll be so cool.
My friend is designing an outfit that I get to wear, and it's really made me think about body issues. And I talked to you about it, Corinne, and you're so open and honest. It's time for somebody that was born in 1980 to talk about the cultural crap that has been in my brain since I was born as a woman.
So how much of that, unfortunately, is coming back. I mean, the pendulum is kind of swinging in the other direction. We got some body positivity. We got some love.
We did. And now
and then now the pendulum is swinging back.
My
And
6-year-old daughter has made comments about how she needs to stay skinny. And I'm like, well, she's not hearing that from me. Where is she hearing that from? And then I'm
yeah,
like, oh, this is so much more than what mommy and daddy say around her. So
yes,
yeah, let's get into
it's
that next
thick.
week. Different topic that'll hopefully be helpful for everyone if we just are open and honest about what goes on in our brains with
100%.
weight.
I can't wait to talk about that with you,
Me
Sarah. So we'll
too.
be back next week. Thank you everybody for watching and listening. If you're listening to this on wherever you listen to podcasts, please leave us a review, rate it, share it with your friends, download it. That helps us quite a bit. If you're on social media, please share it, like and follow. Even just you don't even have to write a comment. Just click share and click share. It's the easiest thing you can do.
Yep.
When
Invite
people
your
ask,
friends on Facebook. That
yeah,
helps so much. And also subscribe on our YouTube. Facebook and YouTube and
yes.
podcasts are the main ways people are watching our shows. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah. And thank you, Sarah. This was great. I
This
appreciate
was
you.
fun. I'm proud of you, girl. I'm
Yeah.
proud of you for being involved in doing this. That's pretty cool, but
It was
crazy.
very,
Wild.
very
Wild.
crazy, very
Yeah.
crazy. But yes, it's still, I mean, we'll see other cases coming out. I mean, they are still working on others. So
Wow.
this is certainly not
I
the
hope you
end
follow it
of the
and keep
story.
talking, telling us about it.
Yeah, I will.
Thanks.
Thanks
Everybody.
everyone.
Have a fantastic day. Bye.
Bye.